No nanny lasted with the Vampire King's twins, until a human maid did the impossible awesome. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The Vampire King was notorious for his cold, calculating demeanor, and his power was absolute. Yet, there was one thing that even his immense wealth and authority could not fix: the challenge of raising his twins. It had been said that no nanny had lasted more than a few days in the castle, and for good reason. His twins were no ordinary children. They were fierce, unpredictable, and far too intelligent for their age. The Vampire King, whose name was Lucien, had long ago stopped trying to find a suitable caretaker for them. Every nanny had fled, unable to handle the overwhelming demands of his children. Their abilities were beyond comprehension: telekinesis, mind control, and the power to manipulate the elements with just a thought. These were just a few of the powers the twins possessed. They had been born under a dark omen, their very existence tied to the ancient bloodline of vampires. Lucien, though a king, was helpless in the face of the turmoil they caused. The nannies he hired all believed they could tame the wildness of the twins, but each had been sent running, broken, and defeated. Lucien could do nothing but watch as his children grew more powerful, yet more uncontrollable. And so, the king's solution had always been to hire new nannies, one after another, hoping for a miracle that never came. But everything was about to change. In the most unlikely of circumstances, a young maid named Emily entered the castle. Emily was nothing like the nannies before her. She was a simple girl from a village far away, with no experience in handling children, let alone the dangerous twins of a vampire king. But she had one thing the others did not: courage. She had no idea what she was stepping into when she took the job, but the pay was good, and her family needed the money. Emily had no idea that her life was about to change forever. As soon as she stepped into the castle, she was met with the chilling silence of the vampire court. The guards watched her closely, their eyes cold and calculating, as though she were nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game. Emily's task seemed simple: care for the king's children and do the usual maid duties. However, the moment she entered the twins' nursery, she realized just how difficult her new job would be. The twins were playing in their room, surrounded by broken toys and shattered glass. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light, and their smiles were anything but innocent. Emily hesitated but stepped inside. The moment she did, one of the twins, a boy named Aleron, glanced up at her with a mischievous grin. He raised his hand, and Emily felt a rush of air, as if something had pressed against her chest. Aleron giggled, clearly enjoying the power he had over her. His sister, Alina, was no different. She was perched on the windowsill, her small fingers twitching as she controlled the wind to swirl around her. Emily's heart raced, but she refused to back down. She had seen hardship in her life, and this was just another challenge. She took a deep breath, remembering the words of her grandmother, who had once told her, "When in doubt, show kindness, and the rest will follow." Emily didn't know what to expect from the twins, but she knew one thing: she would not let fear rule her. What happened next was something neither she nor the Vampire King could have ever predicted. The first few days were a blur for Emily. Every time she entered the nursery, she could feel the weight of the twins' eyes on her, their silent judgment lingering in the air. Aleron, the boy, had a playful streak, constantly testing her limits. Alina, on the other hand, was quieter, but her eyes held a coldness that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. It was as though the twins knew exactly how much power they wielded, and they enjoyed seeing Emily squirm. Despite their powers, Emily didn't give in. She did her best to maintain a calm presence, always speaking softly, her hands steady as she cleaned, and made sure they were fed and cared for. Each time the twins acted out, whether it was Aleron levitating objects to test her, or Alina manipulating the wind to scatter her belongings, Emily kept her composure. She knew she had no choice but to push through. One afternoon, when Emily was cleaning the windows in the nursery, Aleron wandered up to her and tugged at her sleeve. "Why are you always so quiet?" he asked, his voice mischievous. Emily paused, wiping the glass with a rag, and turned to face him. "I'm just trying to do my job," she replied, her voice calm, though her heart raced. Oleron studied her for a moment, his bright, almost unnatural eyes narrowing, as if sizing her up. "You're different from the others," he said, more to himself than to her. Emily didn't know how to respond to that. She was different, yes, but not because of any special power or ability. She was simply trying to survive. "The others left because they were scared," Oleron added, his tone softening. "You're not scared, are you?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what it was that made her not fear them, but she certainly wasn't about to admit it aloud. "I'm not scared," she said softly, trying to sound convincing. Oleron's lips curled into a smile, a strange, almost knowing look in his eyes. He turned away, and for a moment, Emily wondered if she had passed some unspoken test. But then, just as quickly, Oleron's playful demeanor returned, and he grabbed a toy from the shelf and threw it across the room, laughing as it shattered against the wall. Emily took a deep breath and returned to her work, trying to ignore the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. But it wasn't long before she realized something was different about the twins. They weren't just mischievous, they were lonely. Emily started to notice small things. When Oleron would pause mid-play, his eyes vacant, as though he was remembering something he couldn't reach. Alina, though still distant, would occasionally watch her with an expression that wasn't entirely cold. It was a longing, a desire for connection. Emily had heard the whispers in the castle, of the curse that hung over the Vampire King's family, of how the twins were born into a dark legacy that had marked them from the very start. But Emily didn't care about curses or family legacies. She only cared about the present, about surviving each day and making sure the twins didn't destroy the castle in the process. Yet, despite their power, despite the fear they instilled in everyone who came near them, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for them. The twins weren't born with the power to hurt others. They were born with the burden of being different, of being too powerful for their own good. That night, as Emily was cleaning the twins' room, she heard the Vampire King's voice calling from the hallway. "Emily, come here," he commanded. His voice was as cold as ever, but there was an undercurrent of something more, something that made her stop and hesitate. With a deep breath, Emily stepped into the hallway, where the Vampire King waited, his sharp eyes studying her. He looked every bit the king, powerful, composed, but there was a hint of something more in his gaze. "You've been here for a week now," he said, his voice low. "And the twins, they haven't tried to get rid of you yet." Emily's throat tightened, and she shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "They're not as bad as everyone says," she replied carefully. The Vampire King raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her response. "Is that so? Tell me, Emily, why do you think they've kept you here when they've chased off every other nanny?" Emily didn't know how to answer that. She wasn't sure why the twins hadn't tried to get rid of her yet. She only knew that there was something different about her, something that made her stand out in their eyes. But what was it? Was it her fearlessness, her determination to care for them despite their dangerous abilities? Or was it something else entirely? The Vampire King's gaze softened for just a moment, a flicker of something human in his eyes. "You have more patience than I gave you credit for," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Emily didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. "The twins, they need someone like you," the Vampire King continued. "Someone who won't give up on them, even when they push everyone away." Emily felt a surge of relief. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to make a difference. But she also knew that this was only the beginning. There were still many challenges ahead, and she had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain. She couldn't back down now. Days passed, and Emily's role in the castle began to shift. She had grown used to the twins' antics, Oleron's mischief and Alina's quiet, calculating gaze. Every morning, she would wake early to tend to them, and every evening, she would stay late, ensuring they were bathed, fed, and ready for bed. But it wasn't the daily tasks that had begun to weigh on her. It was the growing sense of mystery surrounding the twins. She had learned much about them in the short time she had been there. They were not just ordinary children. They were heirs to a legacy of power, magic, and dark secrets. Oleron, with his boundless energy and sharp wit, could bend objects with a glance and summon gusts of wind at will. Alina, on the other hand, was reserved, almost too calm for a child her age. She could manipulate shadows, turning the light in any room cold and dark with just a flick of her wrist. At times, Emily found herself questioning the nature of their powers. She had heard whispers among the servants, rumors of curses, of the vampire king's unbreakable bloodline, and of the tragic fate that awaited his children. Emily could sense there was more to the twins than their supernatural abilities, and that made her worry for them. The twins weren't just powerful, they were lonely, lost in a world that expected them to carry a heavy burden. They had no one, no friends, no family other than their father, who was distant and consumed by his kingdom's affairs. Emily, despite her lack of experience, found herself becoming the only constant in their lives. The vampire king, Lucien, had taken notice. He had been watching her from a distance, intrigued by her resilience and her growing bond with the twins. One evening, after the twins had gone to sleep, Lucien summoned Emily to his study. His office was dark, lit only by the glow of the fireplace and a few scattered candles. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken words as Lucien stood by the window, staring out over the vast expanse of his kingdom. "You've been here for over 2 weeks now," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of something deeper. "And the twins, they've changed." Emily, standing in the doorway, waited for him to continue. "What do you mean, sir?" she asked softly. Lucien turned to face her, his piercing amber eyes studying her with a careful intensity. "They are not the same as they were when you first arrived," he said, his tone almost questioning. "They listen to you. They trust you." Emily swallowed, unsure of how to respond. She had no idea why the twins seemed to warm to her, but she wasn't going to question it. They had been nothing but difficult for every other nanny, and yet here she was, still standing, still caring for them. "They need someone," Lucien continued, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "Someone who can guide them, who can help them understand their place in this world." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Was this a test? Did the vampire king believe she was somehow capable of taming the wildness in his children? But even as she thought it, she realized that she had no choice but to try. The twins had no one else. "I'm just a maid," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't have the power to change anything." Lucien's gaze softened, and for the first time since Emily had met him, she saw a flicker of something more human in his eyes. "It's not power they need," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's love." Emily didn't know how to respond to that. The vampire king, the ruler of all vampires, speaking of love like it was something he could give. She had heard the stories, how he had once been a ruthless ruler, feared by all, his heart cold and unyielding. Yet here he was, speaking to her like a father, confiding in her about his children's needs. "I'll do my best," Emily said finally, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Lucien nodded, his expression unreadable. "I know you will," he said. "I can see it in you. You're different from the others." Emily wasn't sure what he meant by that, but she couldn't afford to question it now. The twins needed her. The castle needed her. And somehow, despite the fear and the uncertainty, Emily felt like she needed them too. The next few days passed in a haze of activity. Emily's bond with the twins grew stronger, though they still tested her at every turn. Oleron would play tricks on her, making objects float and slip out of her hands just to watch her reaction. Alina, ever the quiet one, would sit by the window, her gaze distant and cold, as if lost in thoughts that Emily couldn't understand. But the more time Emily spent with them, the more she realized that the twins weren't evil. They were children trapped in a world that demanded too much from them. One evening, as Emily sat with the twins in the nursery, trying to coax them into bedtime, she saw something that made her pause. Oleron had been playing with a small wooden figure, twisting it in his hands, his eyes focused intently on the toy. Suddenly, the figure slipped from his grip and hovered in the air for a moment, spinning slowly before falling to the floor. Oleron looked up at Emily, a mixture of pride and confusion on his face. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her heart racing. "I did." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Oleron spoke again, his voice quiet but serious. "I'm not like other kids, am I?" Emily felt a pang in her chest. No, she said softly. But that doesn't mean you're not special. Oleron's face lit up with a smile, and Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth fill the room. She was making a difference, even if it was just a small one. Little by little, the twins were opening up to her, and Emily was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be the one to help them find their place in the world. The days seemed to blur together as Emily continued her duties in the castle. The twins were slowly beginning to show signs of change, small, but significant. Oleron's mischievous streak had softened, though he still played pranks on her. It was clear that he respected her. Alina, who had once barely acknowledged her presence, now sought Emily's company, sitting beside her in silence as they watched the world outside. But as Emily grew closer to the twins, a sense of unease settled within her. The vampire king had remained distant, always watching from afar, yet he rarely spoke about the future of his children. Emily had assumed his cold demeanor was simply a reflection of his position, but the more she observed, the more she realized it was something deeper. One evening, as Emily was leaving the nursery after tucking the twins into bed, she caught sight of Lucien in the hallway. His tall, imposing figure stood at the end of the corridor, bathed in the dim light from the candelabra. His amber eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other, neither speaking. It was Emily who broke the silence. "Your children are adjusting," she said quietly, unsure of how to approach the topic. Lucien's expression was unreadable. "They're different with you," he replied, his voice low and steady. "I can see that." Emily hesitated, then spoke again. "What happens to them? When they're older?" Lucien's gaze softened for the briefest moment before he turned away, walking toward his study. "That depends on them," he said, his voice distant. "And on what happens in the coming years." Emily's curiosity was piqued, but she didn't press further. She had seen the way the vampire king carried the weight of his responsibilities, his kingdom, his bloodline, his legacy. She couldn't imagine the pressure of it all. But there was something else, something unspoken between them. "The twins will grow into their powers," Lucien continued, turning back to face her. "And when they do, they will need guidance. Someone who can help them understand what they are, what they must become." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "And what do you want them to become?" Lucien's eyes flashed with something fierce, something ancient. "They will become what they must, Emily. They will be the future of our kind." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and Emily couldn't help but wonder what that future might look like. But before she could ask another question, Lucien turned and walked into his study, leaving Emily standing alone in the corridor, her heart racing. The next morning, as Emily entered the twins' room to prepare for their lessons, she noticed something strange. Oleron was sitting quietly by the window, staring out at the distant horizon, his usual mischievous energy absent. Alina, too, seemed distracted, her usual calm demeanor replaced with a look of deep concentration. "What's wrong?" Emily asked gently, walking toward them. Oleron looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and fear. "I don't want to be like him," he said quietly. "I don't want to be a king." Emily's heart sank. "Oleron, you don't have to be anything you don't want to be." But Oleron shook his head, his small hands clenching into fists. "But I can't change what I am," he whispered, his voice trembling. "We can't." Emily knelt beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You're not alone, Oleron," she said softly. "You have people who care about you." Alina, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "But we don't know how to stop it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily turned to her, her heart aching at the vulnerability in the young girl's eyes. "Stop what?" Emily asked. "The darkness," Alina replied, her gaze shifting to the shadows that seemed to linger in the corners of the room. "The power that comes with being what we are." Emily didn't know how to respond. She had no answers for them, no solution to the fear that seemed to grip the twins' hearts. But one thing was clear. The twins were not just children. They were heirs to a power that could shape the world, for better or for worse. Later that evening, as Emily was sitting by the fire in the castle's grand hall, Lucien approached her again. This time, his demeanor was different, softer, almost reluctant. He stood beside her, his gaze distant as he watched the flames dance in the hearth. "You've made a difference with them," he said quietly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. Emily didn't look at him. but she could feel the weight of his words. They need more than just care, she said, her voice steady. They need answers. They need to know what their future holds. Lucien's expression hardened, but his eyes flickered with something deeper, regret, perhaps, or something he had buried long ago. Their future is not mine to decide, he said softly, his voice tinged with sorrow. But I hope they find a way to carve their own path. Emily looked up at him then, her eyes meeting his. And what about you, Your Majesty? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lucien didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his gaze to the fire, his face unreadable. I have already chosen my path, he said, his voice low. Now, it's up to them to choose theirs. The silence between them stretched, and Emily couldn't help but wonder if the weight of that decision, the future of the twins, their place in the world, was something that even Lucien could not control. As the night wore on, Emily found herself contemplating the same question the twins had asked. What was their future? And more importantly, what part would she play in shaping it? The weeks that followed felt like a delicate dance for Emily. The twins were slowly changing, their behavior more controlled but still unpredictable. Aleron's mischief, while still present, had taken on a quieter form. He no longer threw objects just to see them shatter. Instead, he would watch them float and spin through the air, as if testing the limits of his power. Alina, ever the more reserved of the two, seemed to open up a bit more. She would often sit beside Emily, her small hands playing with a doll or drawing symbols in the dust with her finger. Emily couldn't help but notice the quiet moments the twins shared, moments where they let their guard down and showed a glimpse of the children they could have been, had their lives not been so burdened with power. But even as they seemed to soften, there was an underlying tension that Emily couldn't ignore. Lucien's warnings had grown more frequent, and Emily could feel the weight of his expectations pressing down on her. They are dangerous, he had told her one evening, his voice firm. They must learn to control their powers before it's too late. It was a stark reminder of the stakes at hand. The twins' abilities were a gift, yes, but they were also a curse, one that could destroy them if they didn't learn how to wield them. And Emily was the one who had been entrusted with the task of guiding them. She had no experience with magic, no knowledge of how to help children with such extraordinary abilities, but she had no choice but to try. One evening, as the castle lay quiet under a full moon, Emily entered the twins' nursery to find them unusually still. Aleron was sitting on the floor, his legs crossed in front of him, and Alina was standing by the window, staring out at the night sky. There was an unsettling air about them, something Emily couldn't place. What are you two doing? She asked, trying to mask the unease in her voice. Aleron glanced up at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. We're thinking, he replied, his voice oddly serious for someone so young. Alina didn't turn to face her, but her voice was soft when she spoke. We're wondering what it would be like if we didn't have these powers. Emily felt a pang in her chest. She had always known that the twins were burdened by their abilities, but hearing them speak about it so openly made her heart ache. She walked over to them, kneeling down beside Aleron. I know it's hard, she said gently, but you don't have to face this alone. Aleron's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in them. We don't want to hurt anyone, he said quietly, but we don't know how to stop it. Emily's heart broke for him. She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to do it alone, she repeated. You have me, and you have your father. Together, we'll figure it out. Alina finally turned to look at her, her expression unreadable. Do you think we can control it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer. The truth was, she didn't know. She had no idea how to help them control their powers. But she couldn't tell them that. Instead, she smiled, trying to offer some comfort. I think you can, she said softly. I believe in you. The twins didn't respond right away, but Emily could see that her words had made an impact. Aleron looked down at his hands, his fingers curling into fists before he slowly relaxed them. Alina's gaze lingered on Emily, her expression softening just slightly. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily felt like there was a chance. A chance for the twins to find peace, a chance for them to be free from the burden of their powers. The next day, Emily began working with the twins in earnest. She set aside time each morning to teach them how to control their abilities, starting with simple exercises like focusing on levitating small objects. It wasn't easy. Alaron had the most natural talent for telekinesis, but his energy was wild, and it often led to objects flying out of control. Alina, on the other hand, was more methodical but struggled to connect with her powers. Emily would guide them through each exercise, reminding them to stay calm and focused. It was slow progress, but it was progress. Alaron's pranks became less chaotic, and Alina's manipulation of shadows grew more refined. They were learning, little by little. It was during one of these training sessions that Emily noticed something strange. As Alaron focused on a floating ball, his brow furrowed in concentration. A flicker of dark energy surrounded his hands. Emily's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the playful power she had come to expect from him. This was something darker, more dangerous. She moved toward him cautiously, her voice steady. Alaron, stop, she said softly. He looked up at her, confusion in his eyes. What's wrong? He asked. You're not focusing, Emily replied, her voice calm but firm. You're letting the darkness take over. Alaron's eyes widened in realization, and he quickly let the ball fall to the floor. Emily knelt beside him. It's okay, she reassured him. You just need to learn how to control it. You have to focus on the light, not the darkness. Alaron nodded, taking a deep breath. Emily could see the effort it took for him to calm himself, but he managed to regain control, the dark energy dissipating. Alina, who had been watching from a distance, approached slowly. I don't want that darkness to take over me, she said quietly, her voice tinged with fear. Emily smiled at her, trying to hide the worry she felt. It won't, she said softly. You'll both be fine, I promise. And for the first time in a long time, Emily believed it too. The days that followed were filled with a strange mix of progress and uncertainty. Emily continued to work with the twins, her patience and determination beginning to pay off. Alaron had stopped creating chaos with his powers, and Alina, though still quiet, had begun to focus more on controlling her manipulation of shadows. But even as the twins began to show signs of progress, Emily could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken weight of what lay ahead. One evening, as Emily sat in the nursery with the twins, she noticed something unusual. Alaron was standing by the window, staring out into the darkened courtyard, his fingers twitching slightly. Alina, sitting across the room, was drawing symbols in the air with her finger, her eyes fixed on the floor as if lost in thought. Emily watched them both for a moment before standing up. Alaron, she said gently, approaching him. What's going on? Alaron didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, looking out at the night. Finally, he turned to her, his expression tense. I feel something, he said, his voice quiet. Something's coming. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had learned to trust the twins' instincts, and if Alaron felt something, it wasn't to be ignored. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up on her. Alaron's eyes were wide now, his gaze unfocused as if he were seeing something beyond the castle walls. I don't know, he whispered. It's like there's a storm coming. I can feel it. Emily looked at him, unsure of what to say. She had never seen the twins react this way before. Alaron was usually so playful, so full of energy, but now he seemed afraid. It's okay, Emily said, trying to reassure him. You're safe here with me. But Alaron didn't seem to hear her. His gaze shifted to Alina, who had stopped drawing. Her eyes were fixed on her brother, a look of deep concern on her face. Emily turned to Alina. What's going on, sweetheart? Alina's voice was barely a whisper as she spoke. I can feel it too, she said. The darkness. It's getting closer. Emily's heart tightened in her chest. She could see that something was bothering the twins, something beyond their powers, something far darker. But what? What was coming? Emily, Lucien's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression as unreadable as ever. Come with me, he said, his voice low and urgent. There's something you need to see. Emily nodded and followed him, the twins trailing behind her. They made their way through the castle's grand halls, the torches lining the walls flickering in the dim light. Emily's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Lucien led her to a hidden chamber deep within the castle, one she had never seen before. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dark, stone room. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface covered in intricate carvings. Lucien stepped forward and placed his hand on the mirror's surface. "This is the mirror of truth," he said, his voice grave. "It shows the past, present, and future, if you know how to look." Emily stood still, unsure of what to make of this revelation. Lucien's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something vulnerable in his gaze. "I've been avoiding it," he confessed. "I didn't want to see what was coming. But now, I have no choice." Emily watched as Lucien's fingers traced the mirror's surface, and slowly, the glass began to shimmer, the image inside shifting and changing. What appeared was a dark figure, cloaked in shadow, its face obscured by a hood. The figure stood in a vast, desolate landscape, its form radiating an eerie, otherworldly power. "Who is that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Lucien's jaw tightened. "That is the source of the darkness," he said quietly. "A force that has been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike." The image in the mirror shifted again, showing the twins, Aleron and Alina, standing alone in the same desolate landscape, their powers surging around them, but they were not in control. They were being consumed by the darkness. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered. "This can't happen." Lucien turned to face her, his expression cold. "It's inevitable," he said. "The twins are the key. They're the ones who can either save us or destroy us all." The weight of his words hit Emily like a ton of bricks. The twins were the key? They were the ones who could control the fate of the world? She had been caring for them, guiding them, but she had never known just how important they truly were. "What can we do?" Emily asked, her voice filled with desperation. Lucien's gaze softened for a moment. "We prepare," he said simply. "We train them. We help them understand their powers. And when the time comes, we face the darkness together." Emily nodded, though doubt and fear still lingered in her chest. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear. She was no longer just caring for the twins. She was preparing them for something far greater. And she would not back down. Not now. Not ever. The following days brought with them a sense of urgency. Lucien had always been distant, but the weight of the situation was starting to show. He spent more time in the castle's hidden chambers, poring over ancient texts and consulting with trusted advisors. Emily could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something was coming, something that none of them were truly prepared for. But one thing was clear. The twins, Aleron and Alina, were the key. They had powers far beyond anything Emily had ever imagined, and she had to help them control them before it was too late. Every day, she worked with them, teaching them how to focus, how to control their abilities. Aleron was the more energetic of the two, always eager to test his limits. But as much as he wanted to prove himself, he struggled with focus. Emily worked tirelessly to help him channel his power, showing him how to control his telekinesis, how to direct his energy without letting it spiral out of control. Alina, on the other hand, was quieter, more reserved. Her abilities were just as strong, but she struggled with fear, afraid of what she might do if she lost control. Emily would sit with her for hours, talking her through her doubts, helping her find peace with the power that surged within her. It was slow work, but Emily could see the changes in them. Aleron was no longer throwing objects around for fun. He was learning how to focus, how to make the objects float gently, not just slam them into walls. Alina's manipulation of shadows had become more graceful, more controlled. She no longer seemed afraid of her own abilities. But even as Emily saw progress, she knew that they weren't ready for what was coming. Lucien's warnings echoed in her mind. The darkness was getting closer, and the twins were the only ones who could stop it. She didn't know how, but she had to help them find a way. One night, as Emily was walking through the castle, she found herself drawn to the courtyard. The moonlight illuminated the stone paths, casting long shadows across the ground. She walked slowly, her thoughts consumed by everything she had learned about the twins, about their powers, about the darkness that loomed over them all. It was then that she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Lucien, standing in the doorway of the castle, watching her. "Emily," he called softly. She walked toward him, her heart heavy with the weight of their situation. "How are they?" Lucien asked, his voice betraying nothing of his true feelings. "They're making progress," Emily replied. but they're still not ready. I don't know what's coming, but I feel like we're running out of time. Lucien's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he looked toward the horizon. You're right. We are running out of time. The darkness will not wait forever. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The way Lucien spoke, the look in his eyes, it was clear that he knew more than he was saying. What are we going to do? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Lucien met her gaze, his eyes cold and unwavering. We prepare, he said simply. We train the twins. We give them the knowledge they need to control their powers. And when the time comes, we face the darkness together. Emily nodded, though doubt lingered in her mind. She wasn't sure if the twins could handle what lay ahead. They were still children, after all, no matter how powerful they were. But Lucien was right. They had no choice. I'll do whatever it takes, Emily said, her voice firm. Lucien nodded, his expression softening for just a moment. I know you will, he said quietly. You're the only one who can help them now. Emily didn't know if she believed that, but she couldn't afford to question it. She had to believe in the twins, in herself, in the possibility of defeating the darkness. As the days turned into weeks, Emily continued her training with the twins. The pressure mounted, but Emily pushed through it, determined to help them succeed. One evening, as they were practicing their powers in the castle's courtyard, something happened. Oleron was concentrating hard on a floating stone, his brow furrowed in concentration, when suddenly, the stone began to crack. It started small, just a hairline fracture, but within seconds, the entire stone shattered, sending shards flying in all directions. Oleron jumped back, his face pale with shock. I didn't mean to, he whispered, his voice shaking. Emily rushed to his side, her heart pounding. It's okay, she said, trying to reassure him. You're learning. It's okay to make mistakes. Oleron looked up at her, his eyes filled with fear. What if I can't control it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily took a deep breath and knelt down in front of him. You will, she said firmly. We'll work together. You'll get it under control. I promise. Oleron's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he nodded slowly. Emily stood up, turning to Alina, who had been watching silently from the side. It's your turn now, Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. Alina nodded, but Emily could see the hesitation in her eyes. I'm afraid, Alina admitted quietly. What if I hurt someone? Emily walked over to her, kneeling down to look her in the eyes. You won't, she said softly. I'm here with you. You don't have to be afraid. Alina took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. She closed her eyes, focusing as Emily had taught her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the shadows around her began to shift, swirling in the air before dissipating into nothingness. Emily smiled. See? You're doing great. Alina opened her eyes, her face breaking into a small, tentative smile. I did it, she whispered. Emily nodded. Yes, you did. The twins were learning, growing stronger every day. But as Emily looked up at the night sky, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The darkness was still out there, waiting, watching. And when it came, the twins would need to be ready. As the days passed, the tension in the castle grew. Emily could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The twins were making progress, yes, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't ready. No matter how much they learned, no matter how much they controlled their powers, they were still children. And the darkness that Lucien had warned about was drawing closer with every passing day. The nights were the worst. Emily would lie awake in her chamber, her thoughts consumed by the uncertainty of the future. The twins were relying on her, but she had no idea if she could truly protect them. The weight of their destiny was too much for her to bear alone. One evening, as she wandered the halls of the castle, she found herself standing in front of the large, ornate mirror that Lucien had shown her weeks ago. The mirror of truth. She hadn't dared to look into it again, not since that night when Lucien had shown her the dark figure that had been waiting in the shadows. But tonight, something urged her to approach. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the need for answers. She placed her hand on the mirror's cold surface, and instantly, the glass shimmered. The same image from before appeared, but this time, the figure was clearer. The darkness was no longer just a shadow in the distance. It was a force, a tangible presence, looming closer, its power radiating like a storm ready to break. Emily felt her heart race as the figure's face came into view, dark, hooded, and filled with an aura of malevolent energy. The figure's eyes were glowing, their gaze cold and piercing. It was as if the darkness was staring back at her, waiting for her to make a move. Her breath caught in her throat. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, and the mirror cracked, the image shattering like glass. Emily stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. "Emily!" Lucien's voice echoed through the hallway, breaking the silence. She turned to see him standing at the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft but tinged with concern. Emily nodded quickly, trying to steady her breath. I saw it again," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Lucien's eyes darkened as he stepped into the room, his gaze falling on the broken mirror. "The darkness is getting closer," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's only a matter of time before it reaches us." Emily looked at him, her mind racing with fear and confusion. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice cracking. Lucien was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the shattered mirror. "We prepare," he said finally, his voice firm. "The twins must be ready. They are the key." Emily felt a wave of dread wash over her. The twins were still children, still learning to control their powers. Could they really face this darkness? Could they really save them all? "They're not ready," she said softly, her voice filled with doubt. "I know," Lucien replied, his tone heavy with the weight of his own worries. "But they will be. We don't have a choice." Emily swallowed hard, feeling the burden of the responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. The twins were more than just children now. They were the only hope against the darkness, the only chance they had. The next few days were spent in preparation. Emily continued to train the twins, pushing them harder, teaching them to focus their powers, to control their emotions. She could see the determination in their eyes, the desire to protect, to do whatever it took to save their family. But even as they trained, Emily could feel the clock ticking. Every hour that passed brought them closer to the moment when the darkness would arrive. It was a fight they couldn't avoid. One evening, as the twins finished their training for the day, Emily led them out into the courtyard for a walk. The sky was dark, the stars barely visible behind the thick clouds. The wind was still, the air heavy with the promise of a coming storm. As they walked, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. "Do you feel it?" Oleron asked suddenly, his voice quiet, almost as if he had read her thoughts. Emily looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. "Feel what?" she asked, her voice tense. Oleron stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes wide with fear. "The storm," he said. "It's here." Emily's breath caught in her throat as she looked around. The air was thick with energy, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She knew, without a doubt, that Oleron was right. The storm was coming, and with it, the darkness that had been waiting for them. She turned to Lucien, who had been walking a few paces behind them. His face was set, his eyes hard with determination. "It's time," he said quietly. Emily nodded, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. The twins were ready, or as ready as they could be, but she still couldn't shake the fear that gripped her heart. What if they failed? What if the darkness overwhelmed them all? As they made their way back to the castle, Emily could feel the storm growing stronger, the air crackling with power. She knew that this was just the beginning. The battle was coming, and they would have to face it together. The fate of the twins, the kingdom, and everything they held dear rested on their shoulders. And no matter what happened, Emily was determined to protect them. The night was heavy with tension, and the castle seemed to hold its breath. Emily, Lucien, and the twins stood at the edge of the courtyard, the chill of the air palpable. A storm had begun to swirl in the distance, the wind picking up and sending dark clouds across the sky. Emily could feel it in her bones, the sense that something was coming, something beyond their control. The darkness that had loomed over them for so long was now drawing near. Oleron and Alina were silent, their usual banter gone, replaced by a quiet understanding that they were on the edge of something much larger than themselves. Oleron fidgeted, his fingers twitching as he stared into the darkening horizon. "It's almost here," he whispered, his voice shaky. Alina, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "What do we do, Emily?" Emily's heart ached as she looked at the two of them. They were so young, yet they carried the weight of the world on their shoulders. She could see the fear in their eyes, the fear of what might come. But there was something else too, something that gave her hope. These children, these powerful twins, had shown strength before, and they would do so again. "We face it together," Emily said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Lucien, standing beside them, nodded. "They're ready," he said, his voice low. "We've trained them well. Now we must trust in them." Emily turned to Lucien, her gaze intense. "And if they fail?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lucien's eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked less like a king and more like a father. "They won't fail," he said, his voice filled with a conviction that Emily wanted to believe. But deep inside, a part of her still feared what might happen if the twins weren't strong enough to face what was coming. The wind howled louder, and the air crackled with a strange energy. Emily looked at the twins one last time. "Remember," she said softly, "you are not alone in this. I'm with you, no matter what." Alaron looked up at her, his eyes filled with determination. "We can do this," he said, his voice strong. Alina nodded silently, her usual calm replaced by an intensity that matched her brother's. Together, they walked toward the castle's great hall, the storm outside reflecting the storm that was building within them. The hall was dimly lit, the flickering flames of the torches casting long shadows on the stone walls. Emily could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her as they approached the center of the room. Lucien motioned for the twins to step forward. "You are ready," he said, his voice resonating with power. "Now, we face the darkness together." The ground beneath them trembled, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She knew what was coming. The darkness was here, and it was time to confront it. As the twins stepped forward, Emily's heart raced. She knew the battle ahead would be fierce, but she also knew that the twins had the strength to face it. They had come so far, and now they were ready to fight for their future. "Focus," Emily said, her voice steady. "You have the power to control this." The twins nodded, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Alaron extended his hand, and the room seemed to darken as a powerful force built around him. Alina stood next to him, her hands glowing with the power of shadows. Together, they began to channel their abilities, their energy combining in a swirl of light and darkness. The storm outside raged, the winds howling and the sky flashing with lightning. Inside the castle, the air was thick with power as the twins focused on their goal, to control the darkness that threatened to consume them all. But as they worked together, Emily noticed something strange. The darkness was not simply receding, it was fighting back. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the air seemed to grow colder, more suffocating. Emily felt a rush of panic, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had to stay calm. The twins needed her now more than ever. "You can do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Trust yourselves." Alaron's eyes were filled with a fierce determination, and he clenched his fists, forcing the darkness back. Alina's expression was one of complete concentration as she controlled the shadows, pushing them into submission. For a moment, it seemed like they had won. The darkness had been pushed back, and the storm outside began to calm. But then, the ground trembled once more, and a loud crash echoed through the hall. The darkness returned with a vengeance, stronger than before. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. They weren't ready. This wasn't just a battle. They were facing an enemy more powerful than anything they had ever known. "No," Lucien shouted, stepping forward. "We must end this now." Emily turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do?" she cried. Lucien's face was grim. "We fight," he said, his voice filled with resolve. Together, Emily looked at the twins, who were still struggling to maintain control. They were exhausted, their powers stretched to their limits. But despite everything, they kept fighting, their determination shining through. Emily stepped forward, her heart racing. She wasn't a warrior. She didn't have the strength to fight in the way Lucien and the twins did. But she had something else. She had love. And with that love, she would fight beside them. Together, they could defeat the darkness. Emily took a deep breath and raised her hands, channeling the energy of the castle, the energy of the bond she shared with the twins, into the fight. The room exploded with light, a blinding flash of power that lit up the entire castle. The darkness screamed, but it was no match for the strength of their combined force. Slowly, the shadows began to retreat, their power waning as the light grew stronger. Emily felt a surge of hope, but she knew the battle was far from over. They had won this round, but there was still more to come. The battle had only just begun. The darkness, though momentarily pushed back, was far from defeated. Emily could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, as the remnants of the storm outside continued to rattle the castle. Alaron and Alina, though exhausted, stood firm by her side, their powers flickering but not fully spent. Lucien was at the front, his face set in a grim expression, eyes flashing with a mix of determination and fear. The danger had not passed. The darkness, it seemed, had been waiting, biding its time, and now it was aware of them, aware of the twins and the threat they posed. Emily had always known the stakes were high, but now, standing in the heart of the castle, with the fate of everyone she cared about hanging in the balance, the weight of it all felt unbearable. "We need to act quickly," Lucien said, his voice low but urgent. "The darkness knows we are here, and it will be relentless. We have to finish this before it can regroup." Emily nodded, though doubt still clung to her heart. "How?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain calm. "The twins aren't ready. They've only just learned how to control their powers." Lucien's gaze softened for a moment, his eyes dark with the knowledge of what was at stake. "They are more ready than they think," he said. "We've trained them for this, Emily. They can do it." Emily turned to the twins. Alaron was still breathing heavily, his hands trembling, but his eyes burned with resolve. Alina, though quieter, stood tall beside him, her expression steady. They had both come so far. They were no longer the scared children they had been when she first arrived at the castle. They were warriors now. Emily could see that in the way they held themselves. "Are you both ready?" she asked, her voice gentle. Alaron nodded without hesitation. "We're ready," he said, though his voice was thick with emotion. "We won't let it win." Alina's lips curled into a small but determined smile. "Together," she said simply. Emily took a deep breath. She had always believed in them, but now she had to put her trust into action. She had to believe that they could do the impossible. "Then let's do this," she said, her voice firm. The four of them, Lucien, Emily, Alaron, and Alina, moved into the grand hall, where the storm outside seemed to mirror the chaos that was unfolding. The air was heavy with power, with tension, and Emily could feel every step, every breath, as if the castle itself was holding its breath along with them. As they reached the center of the hall, the darkness returned, more powerful than before. The shadows seemed to rise from the very stone beneath their feet, twisting and writhing like living things. It was no longer just an oppressive presence. It had shape now, form, as if it had materialized from the depths of their worst fears. Emily's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't afford to show fear, not now. "Stay focused," Lucien ordered, his voice calm but carrying a weight of authority. "Alaron, Alina, you have to channel your powers together. You are stronger when you work as one." The twins exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They stepped forward, their hands outstretched as they began to focus. Emily could feel the surge of energy building between them, the raw power pulsing in the air. But the darkness was not going to let them win so easily. It lashed out, tendrils of shadow reaching for the twins, trying to smother their light. Alaron gritted his teeth, his brow furrowed as he fought to hold the darkness at bay. Alina's hands glowed with a soft light, the shadows around her flickering as she pushed back. "You can do this," Emily whispered, though her words were barely audible above the roar of the storm. The twins' eyes locked, their focus sharpening. Together, they pushed forward, their combined power pushing the darkness back inch by inch. But the darkness was relentless, pulling at them, trying to break through their defenses. Emily felt a surge of fear. She couldn't let them do this alone. She stepped forward, her hands raised, and she focused. She had no powers of her own, no magic to call upon, but she had something stronger, love. She reached out with her heart, her soul, offering her strength to the twins. "I'm with you," she whispered, her voice strong despite the fear that threatened to consume her. The twins seemed to feel her presence, her strength, and they pushed harder. The darkness howled, its form twisting and writhing, but it could not break through. Slowly, ever so slowly, the shadows began to recede. The room, once filled with fear and darkness, was now filled with light. The storm outside began to die down, the wind quieting, the clouds parting. Emily felt a deep sense of relief wash over her, but she knew it wasn't over. The darkness had been defeated, but only for now. They had won this battle, but there would be more to come. And Emily knew, with a certainty she had never felt before, that she would fight beside the twins every step of the way. They had proven their strength, and now, they would face whatever came next together. The castle had fallen silent in the aftermath of the battle, the storm that had once raged. Outside was now but a memory, its ferocity replaced by an eerie calm. Emily stood in the grand hall, her heart still racing from the power of the confrontation they had just endured. The twins, Alaron and Alina, were resting nearby, their bodies drained from the effort, but their spirits strong. Lucien stood by the window, his gaze distant, his mind clearly occupied by the weight of what had just transpired. Emily could see it in the lines of his face, the furrow of his brow. He had known this moment was coming, but now that it had arrived, it was clear to her that he had not been prepared for the toll it would take on them all. She walked toward him, her footsteps soft against the stone floor. "We did it," she said quietly, standing beside him. "For now," Lucien replied, his voice low, filled with both relief and caution. "But the darkness is not gone. It was only driven back, and we cannot afford to relax." Emily nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. She had felt it too, the lingering presence of the darkness, like a shadow that hadn't quite lifted. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain strong. Lucien turned to face her, his eyes sharp, his expression unreadable. "Now we prepare," he said simply. "We've won a battle, but the war is far from over. There will be more challenges ahead, and we need to be ready." The weight of his words hung in the air, thick with unspoken fear. Emily glanced at the twins, who were now lying on a set of cushions, their eyes closed, their breathing slow but steady. They had proven themselves in the heat of the battle, but they were still children, and the thought that they might be called upon again, to face something even worse than before, terrified her. "How do we prepare them for what's to come?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucien's gaze softened just slightly. "We teach them," he said. "We give them the knowledge and the strength to face whatever comes next. And we trust that they can do it." Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had always known that the twins were special, that their powers held the key to everything. But now, she was beginning to realize just how much. Responsibility rested on their young shoulders. The path ahead would not be easy, for any of them, but they had made it through the worst of it together. She turned to Lucien, her resolve hardening. "I won't let them face this alone," she said firmly. "Neither will I," Lucien replied, his voice unwavering. "We fight together, as a family." The word lingered in the air, and for the first time, Emily felt something stir in her chest, a flicker of hope. They could do this. They had to. Over the next few weeks, they focused on preparing the twins. Training sessions became more intense, their powers pushed to new limits. Emily had always known that Alaron was a natural, his telekinesis strong and quick to develop. But now, under Lucien's guidance, he began to refine his skills, learning to control the bursts of energy that had once been chaotic and wild. Alina, too, showed marked improvement. Her manipulation of shadows was no longer an uncontrollable force, but a tool she could wield with precision. Emily worked closely with them, offering support, encouragement, and love. She could see the change in their eyes as they grew more confident in their abilities. But there were still moments of doubt, moments when the weight of their destiny seemed too much to bear. One evening, as they sat in the courtyard after a particularly grueling training session, Emily noticed Alaron gazing out at the horizon, his brow furrowed in thought. "What's on your mind?" she asked, walking over to him. He looked up at her, his expression distant. "I keep wondering," he said slowly. "What if we can't stop it? What if we can't save everyone?" Emily's heart ached as she knelt beside him. "You're not alone in this," she said softly, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You have your family, Lucien, and me. And together, we will face whatever comes. You can do this." You're stronger than you think. Oleron's gaze softened as he looked at her. I don't want to fail, he admitted. I don't want to disappoint you or anyone else. Emily smiled gently. You won't fail, she said, her voice filled with conviction. And you'll never disappoint me. Oleron nodded, though the doubt in his eyes remained. Emily turned to Alina, who was sitting quietly nearby, watching them both with a thoughtful expression. What about you? Emily asked, her voice full of concern. How are you holding up? Alina looked up at her, her usual calm demeanor intact. I'm not afraid, she said quietly, her eyes reflecting a quiet strength. I know we can win, but I also know that it won't be easy. Emily smiled at her, proud of the young girl who had come so far. You're right, she said softly. It won't be easy, but we'll face it together, no matter what. That night, as Emily lay in her bed, her thoughts were filled with the twins, with the battle that loomed on the horizon, and with the strength they had shown. The darkness had not been defeated, but they had proven they could fight it. And as long as they had each other, they would face whatever came next. Together. The air was thick with anticipation as Emily stood beside Lucien, watching the twins prepare for what was to come. The weeks of training had led to this moment, the moment when they would face the darkness that had loomed over them for so long. Oleron and Alina were no longer the scared children they had once been. They had grown stronger, their powers more refined, but the weight of their responsibility was clear in their eyes. They knew what was at stake. They knew the darkness was not just something they could defeat with strength alone. Emily could feel the tension in the castle, the anticipation of the coming battle that would determine the fate of everything they had fought for. Lucien stood tall, his expression stoic, but there was an edge to him that Emily had never seen before. He was not just the vampire king now. He was a father, watching over his children as they prepared for their first real battle. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back. We need to move quickly, Lucien said, his voice low but urgent. The darkness is already here, and it will not stop until it has consumed everything. Emily turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. What if they're not ready? She asked, her voice filled with doubt. What if the twins can't handle it? Lucien's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. They are ready, he said firmly. They have shown us time and time again that they are capable. They have the strength within them to face this. Emily nodded, but her heart was still heavy with fear. The twins had come so far, but this was different. This wasn't just a test of their powers. It was a battle for their lives. The darkness was no longer just a force in the shadows. It was a tangible enemy, one that had already shown its strength. Oleron and Alina had trained long and hard, but this was their final trial. We can't do this without you, Emily said, turning to the twins. We have to fight together, or we won't make it. Oleron, standing beside Alina, nodded. His eyes were filled with determination, but Emily could see the fear in his gaze. We're ready, he said quietly. We won't let it take us. Alina, ever calm, met Emily's eyes and spoke in her soft voice. We will fight with everything we have. Emily felt a surge of pride and hope. These were no longer just children. They were warriors, ready to face whatever came next. Then let's go, Lucien said, his voice steady as he turned toward the exit. The castle doors were open, and the night air was thick with tension. The storm had returned, the winds howling outside. But this time, it wasn't just the storm they had to fear. The darkness was closing in. They stepped out into the night, the twins standing between Emily and Lucien as they made their way toward the edge of the castle grounds. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air crackled with dark energy. Emily could feel it, the presence of the darkness, a cold weight pressing down on them all. The sky above was black, the stars hidden behind swirling clouds. The full moon cast a dim light, but it was barely enough to cut through the encroaching shadows. It's here, Oleron said, his voice strained. I can feel it. Emily looked around, her heart racing. The air was thick with the energy of the battle to come. She could hear the distant sound of something moving in the shadows, but it was too far away to make out. Stay close, Lucien ordered, his voice commanding. We face this together as a family. As they walked forward, the darkness seemed to rise from the ground itself, twisting and writhing like a living thing. Emily felt the familiar chill of fear, but she pushed it aside. The twins were with her. Lucien was with her. They had trained for this moment. They were ready. The ground before them began to crack, and a figure emerged from the shadows, a figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. The figure was tall, its form hidden in a dark cloak that seemed to absorb the light around it. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the figure slowly approached, its steps heavy, deliberate. "So, you have come." The figure's voice echoed, low and deep, sending chills through the air. "You think you can stop me?" Lucien stepped forward, his stance firm. "We will stop you," he said, his voice filled with authority. "The twins will stop you." The figure chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "You are fools to think you can defeat me," the figure hissed. "I am darkness itself, and you are nothing but fleeting sparks of light." Oleron stepped forward, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with a fierce determination. "We will never give up," he said, his voice strong. "We're not afraid of you." Alina, too, stepped forward, her eyes focused on the dark figure. "We are not alone," she said softly. "We have each other." The figure's eyes narrowed, its form shifting as if the very darkness around it was alive. "We will see about that," it said, and with a sudden movement, it lunged forward, a surge of dark energy ripping through the air. Emily's heart raced as the battle began. She could feel the weight of the moment, the knowledge that the fate of everything they held dear rested on the shoulders of the twins. But they were not alone. Together, they would fight. Together, they would face the darkness. The darkness surged forward like a storm, but the twins stood strong, their powers blazing with a light that seemed to push back the shadows. Oleron's telekinesis held the darkness at bay, the swirling tendrils of black energy recoiling as he focused, his brow furrowed with concentration. Alina, standing beside him, manipulated the shadows, weaving them into barriers that absorbed the malevolent force that sought to destroy them. Emily stood back, watching as the twins fought with everything they had. Lucien was beside her, his gaze unwavering as he watched his children. They were no longer just children, they were warriors. And despite the fear that still gripped Emily's heart, she knew they could do this. The darkness hissed as it clashed against the light, the battle intensifying with each passing moment. The air crackled with raw energy, and the ground beneath them trembled. Emily could feel the weight of the moment, the knowledge that the fate of their world rested on the outcome of this fight. "Push harder," Lucien called out to the twins, his voice strong and commanding. "Don't let it win." Oleron gritted his teeth, his hands shaking with the effort, but he didn't falter. "We won't let it win," he said, his voice fierce. Alina, her eyes closed in deep concentration, whispered, "We'll stop it, together." The darkness screamed in fury, its form shifting and warping as it lashed out, trying to break through their defenses. But the twins held strong, their powers growing more focused, more controlled with each passing second. Emily felt her heart swell with pride as she watched them, her fears slowly replaced with hope. They were winning. The darkness, though powerful, was no match for the strength of the bond between the twins, their family, and the love that fueled their fight. But just as Emily thought they had gained the upper hand, a burst of dark energy shot toward them, faster than they could react. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she saw the attack coming. But before she could move, Lucien stepped forward, his body taking the brunt of the strike. He fell to his knees, his body trembling with the force of the blow. "Father!" Oleron shouted, his voice breaking. Emily rushed to Lucien's side, panic rising in her chest as she knelt beside him. "Lucien, no!" she cried, her hands trembling as she reached for him. Lucien looked up at her, his expression pained but resolute. "It's not over yet," he said, his voice strained. "You have to finish it. The twins are ready. They can do this." Emily's heart broke as she realized the gravity of what he was saying. Lucien had given everything to protect them, and now it was up to the twins to finish the battle. Oleron and Alina stepped forward, their eyes burning with the intensity of their power. "We can do it," Oleron said, his voice strong despite the fear that still lingered in his eyes. Alina nodded, her face calm, her hands glowing with a soft, steady light. Together, they raised their hands, their powers intertwining, the light from their combined energy forming a brilliant sphere that radiated warmth and strength. Emily watched in awe as they channeled everything they had into a single, unified strike. The darkness recoiled, but it was too late. The sphere of light surged forward, tearing through the darkness like a beacon of hope. The darkness screamed one final time, its form dissipating as the light consumed it. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and for a moment, Emily thought the castle might crumble. But then, as the light faded, the storm outside began to die down. The air cleared, the oppressive weight of the darkness lifting. Emily stood there, stunned, as she realized what had just happened. The battle was over. They had won. The twins, though exhausted, stood tall, their faces filled with the quiet pride of victory. Lucien, though weakened, managed to stand, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and admiration. "You did it," Emily whispered, her voice filled with awe. Oleron looked at her, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion on his face. "We did it," he said softly. Alina nodded beside him, her eyes glowing with the power that still hummed in the air. "Together," she said, her voice steady and filled with strength. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with pride for the two of them. They had come so far. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. And though there would always be challenges ahead, Emily knew that they had the strength to face whatever came next. They had proven that together, they could conquer anything. Lucien stepped forward, his expression softening as he looked at his children. "You've made me proud," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've saved us all." The twins looked at him, their faces filled with the love and respect they had for their father. "We did it for you," Oleron said, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "For all of us." Emily stepped forward, standing beside Lucien. "You're not alone," she said softly. "You'll never be alone again." Lucien looked at her, his expression warm, and for the first time in a long while, Emily saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. They had won, and together, as a family, they would face whatever came next.